The hills above Oak Ridge Estates were quiet that morning, too quiet for a man like Henry Hawk McAllister at 72. Grandpa still woke up before sunrise, brewed his coffee strong, and scanned the tree line like he was back on patrol. The cabin he built with his own hands stood at the edge of his land like a monument, stoic, weather-worn and fiercely off-grid. That cabin wasn't just home, it was history. It had seen births, winters, and a dozen local elections. It also sat exactly 15 feet outside the jurisdiction of Oak Ridge's new homeowners association, or so Grandpa thought. I was visiting for the summer, helping him mend fencing and digitize old land records. We'd just finished breakfast when she appeared. Karen Witherspoon, HOA president, the kind of woman who weaponized rules like some people do rifles. Her reputation preceded her: fines for unmowed lawns, cease and desist letters over flower colors, and a now infamous incident involving a 7-year-old's inflatable pool. She arrived in a beige hybrid SUV, parked half-cocked across Grandpa's gravel drive, and exited like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, lips pursed, eyes scanning everything like a hawk that smelled non-compliance. "Good morning," she chirped, in a voice that was more threat than greeting. "I'm here for a routine inspection." Grandpa leaned on the porch, railing, mug in hand, calm as a mountain lion. "Inspection of what?" "Your cabin. We've had several reports about this structure. It may be in violation of newly adopted HOA codes regarding external appearances, permitted utilities, and unregistered buildings." "This land isn't part of Oak Ridge," he replied. "It's independent. Always has been." Karen's smile thinned. "That's under review. With the HOA boundary shift last quarter, your property now falls within our extended oversight zone." I saw the twitch in Grandpa's jaw. "That boundary change isn't legal until it's certified by the county," he said, "which it hasn't." Then Karen took a step forward. "Look, I'm not here to argue. I just need access to verify structural compliance. It'll take 5 minutes." Grandpa took a slow sip of his coffee. "No." Karen blinked. "Excuse me, you don't have jurisdiction, and you're not stepping foot past that gate." The air snapped taut. Even the wind paused. Karen flipped a clipboard open. "Refusal to comply with HOA enforcement measures constitutes a Level 3 violation. You could be fined." "Lady, I built this cabin in 1973 with timber I hold in myself. It's been here longer than your HOA, your board, and your fine print bylaws." He stepped down from the porch. "You're trespassing," she scoffed. "You really think this kind of behavior is going to endear you to the community?" "I'm not part of your community," Grandpa said evenly. Then she made the mistake. With a grunt of righteous fury, Karen reached for the gate latch. "Don't," Grandpa warned. "I have the right to inspect." She swung the gate open. And that's when everything shifted. Before she could step forward, Grandpa was on her, not roughly but with the swift, practiced movements of a man who used to pin down suspects with one hand while radioing dispatch with the other. He twisted her wrist, turned her around, and in one smooth motion, clicked a pair of stainless steel cuffs onto her wrists. Karen yelped, shocked more than hurt. What are you doing?" "You're under citizen's arrest for unlawful entry and trespassing," Grandpa said. I stared, mouth half open as Karen fumed, squirming in the cuffs like a cartoon villain caught in her own trap. "You're insane. This is my neighborhood." "No, ma'am," he said, guiding her to the porch chair with calm efficiency. "This is my land, and you just crossed the wrong line." Behind her, the beige SUV sat idling. In the passenger seat, a young man in a bright yellow vest labeled compliance enforcer remained frozen in place. He made no move to help, could barely meet Grandpa's eyes. "I suggest you call someone who understands the law," Grandpa said, removing his phone and offering it to her. Karen glared. "You'll regret this." Grandpa didn't blink. "Not likely." The wind picked up again, rustling through the pine needles, carrying with it the weight of something new, something final. Lines had been crossed, and the quiet hills were no longer so quiet. The woman with the clipboard came to draw borders, but she forgot. Some fences were built to keep wolves out, and some men never forget how to stand guard. Karen Witherspoon didn't stay handcuffed long. Sheriff Holden arrived within the hour, chuckling as he took in the scene, Karen red-faced and fuming on the porch. Grandpa calm and unapologetic with a mug of fresh coffee in hand. Jim Holden wasn't just the sheriff, he was an old hunting buddy of Grandpa's. They'd tracked elk together in the Rockies, fished for steelhead in the Bitterroot, and shared stories from their respective law enforcement days. When he saw Karen bound in stainless steel cuffs, he didn't reach for his weapon. He reached for his thermos. "Morning, Henry," he said casually. "Coffee's still strong, I see." Grandpa raised his mug. "Helps me deal with unwanted guests." Karen jumped to her feet, nearly tipping the chair. "Sheriff, arrest this man. He assaulted me, physically restrained me, and I demand he be charged immediately." Jim didn't flinch. "You entered his property uninvited." "I was performing an inspection," she snapped. "As president of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, I have the authority to investigate code violations. This cabin is an eyesore, and it's on newly annexed land." Jim turned to Grandpa. "She really say annexed word for word?" Jim whistled. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I've seen the land lines. This cabin is not, and never was, part of the HOA's jurisdiction. You stepped across a private boundary. That means Henry had the right to stop you, even detain you, until we could sort it out. Karen's jaw dropped. You're siding with him. Jim shrugged. I'm siding with the law. Karen demanded the cuffs be removed immediately. Grandpa obliged, though not before Karen yanked her wrists back like she'd been branded. She stormed back to her SUV without another word. The so-called compliance enforcer trailed behind her, offering no support, barely making eye contact with either man. I don't think that's the last of her, I said quietly. Grandpa watched her tires kick up gravel. It never is with folks like her. They don't back down. They escalate. And escalate she did. The very next morning, Karen plastered flyers across Oak Ridge Estates. Illegal structure threatens neighborhood safety, they read, complete with a low-angle photo of the cabin taken from the property line. Beneath the headline were vague allegations, unlicensed generators, potential rodent infestation, and even accusations of harboring wild game without proper fencing. She called an emergency HOA meeting the agenda. A vote to issue daily fines against Parcel 1918, Grandpa's land. We learned about it when a man in a suit showed up at the gate with an envelope, a formal HOA notice. He announced, effective immediately. This property is considered in violation of community codes. Non-compliance will result in daily penalties of $10,000. Grandpa didn't even open the envelope. He handed it back and said, "Tell Karen if she sends another piece of paper across this gate, I'll use it to line the bottom of my smoker." The man left without protest. That night, I watched Grandpa pull out an old metal lockbox. Inside were neatly stacked documents, worn at the edges but perfectly preserved, land deeds signed by his father, zoning approvals from the 1980s, and a notarized letter from the county clerk affirming that his property fell outside Oak jurisdiction. He handed me a folder. "Take these to Sheriff Jim in the morning. Ask him to file a protective boundary order." "You think Karen will push back?" Grandpa looked out the window toward the hills, eyes hard. "She's not here for rules, she's here for power. And power only listens when you push back harder." The next day, the sheriff reviewed the documents and shook his head. "Solid as they come. She doesn't have a legal leg to stand on." But that didn't stop Karen from trying to grow one. She took to social media, spinning a tale about a militant ex-cop squatting on HOA land. She circulated petitions, spoke at town council meetings, even contacted a local reporter claiming Oak Ridge was being held hostage by a paranoid survivalist. Grandpa ignored the noise, but I saw it eat at him quietly, inwardly. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about character, legacy, and he wasn't going to let Karen rewrite his story. "I've seen real power before," he told me one evening watching the sun dip behind the ridge. "It doesn't come from clipboards or hashtags. It comes from standing your ground when no one else will." Then he walked inside, closed the door behind him, and bolted it shut. Karen had picked a fight with the wrong man, and she hadn't even begun to understand what he was capable of. Karen wasn't just persistent, she was relentless. A week after the incident, Oak Ridge's HOA board, under her command, launched a campaign dubbed Reclaim Our Neighborhood. Flyers appeared in mailboxes. An email blast warned residents of a hostile landowner undermining community safety. A digital petition made the rounds, demanding swift legal action to force Grandpa into compliance. But the tighter Karen gripped the reins, the more people began to slip from her grasp. Sheriff Jim called one afternoon, voice gruff but amused. "She tried to file a criminal complaint against you, Henry. Claimed you're operating a compound, said you've got surveillance drones, and get this, feral hogs." Grandpa let out a dry chuckle. "She should worry more about her board than my pigs," because cracks were forming. 3 HOA members quietly resigned that week. One sent Grandpa an apology letter, admitting she had no idea the extent of Karen's obsession. Another posted anonymously on a local forum, describing the HOA meetings as increasingly unhinged, with Karen pushing to impose new regulations retroactively to justify targeting Grandpa's land. Still, Karen pressed on. She submitted a formal request to the county, a motion to redraw the zoning boundary lines to officially place Grandpa's property within HOA control. It was a desperate move, but it caught traction with a junior clerk who didn't know the land's history. That's when Grandpa made his first public appearance. It was a chilly Thursday evening when he walked into the Oak Ridge Community Hall, dressed in his old sheriff's coat, silver badge pinned to his chest. I followed behind him, carrying a leather folio filled with maps, deeds, and official stamps, evidence of his land's sovereignty. The meeting room buzzed with whispered tension. Karen sat at the head table like a queen behind her plastic nameplate, smug and coiled. Well, she said, voice sugary. "Nice of you to finally join us. You've missed several mandatory meetings." Grandpa didn't acknowledge her. He stepped to the center of the room, nodded at the familiar faces, and placed the folio on the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice steady, "I'm not here to debate, argue, or apologize. I'm here to put the truth on record." He opened the folio and began distributing copies of his documents to the seated members and the county clerk present. "These maps were drawn before Oak Ridge existed. This deed is older than any of your board members. This signature, he said, tapping one page, belongs to the same county commissioner who approved your neighborhood's founding, and he excluded my parcel by name. Karen stood abruptly. This is irrelevant. We're not here for a history lesson. We're here to protect Oak Ridge. A few residents clapped half-heartedly. Most stayed silent. Grandpa looked straight at her. Protecting Oak Ridge doesn't mean inventing laws or harassing your neighbors. You crossed onto my land, broke the law, and you're using fear to cover your mistake. Karen's face flushed. You don't belong here. Your cabin is a relic and safe, unsightly and unwanted. Grandpa's voice dropped. Then maybe you shouldn't have moved next to it. Silence, thick and complete. Then, to everyone's surprise, a voice rose from the back. My father helped pour the foundation of that cabin, said old Mr. Garcia, a lifelong resident. That land's not just his, it's part of our history. Another stood up. Karen's been fining me for my garden hose colors. Maybe she's the one who doesn't belong. The room turned. Karen tried to regain control. This is a legal matter. I have support from the zoning office. Grandpa turned to the clerk. Do you have the boundary files? The young man nodded, pulling them from a folder. They clearly showed the cabin outside HOA lines. That settles it, the sheriff said from the doorway, having entered unnoticed. Henry's land is independent. Karen, I suggest you drop the crusade before someone presses charges of harassment. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came. That night, she left the hall in silence, her clipboard abandoned on the table. But Grandpa knew better than to think it was over. She won't quit, he told me later, sitting under the porch light, flipping through a stack of old photographs. Some folks mistake authority for righteousness. When their illusion cracks, they try to rebuild it by force. I watched him stare into the darkness where the pines rustled. He was alert, not fearful, but prepared. Karen had tasted humiliation, and people like her didn't take defeat lying down. The storm didn't hit with thunder. It came in manila envelopes, 3 of them delivered by certified mail. One was from Karen's personal attorney threatening civil action for false imprisonment, public humiliation, and emotional distress. Another was from a zoning consultant clearly hired by Karen, asserting that a pending municipal reassessment could eventually place Grandpa's land within Oak Ridge oversight. The third came from the HOA itself, demanding $150,000 in backdated compliance penalties, retroactively calculated from the day Karen declared the boundary shift. Grandpa barely reacted. He read the letters in silence, then slid them into the fireplace without a word. The flames crackled as legal jargon turned to ash. They think paper can scare me, he muttered. I've stared down men with rifles and nothing left to lose. Still, he wasn't reckless. That night he made one final call to Sheriff Jim, who promised to loop in the county attorney. Meanwhile, I helped Grandpa scan every land deed, every boundary certificate, every legal exemption, then forwarded it to a lawyer who'd once clerked under the state's Supreme Court. Karen wasn't just fighting Grandpa anymore, she was fighting the law. And losing within 2 weeks, the county attorney responded. Their investigation confirmed what Grandpa had claimed all along. The HOA's attempt to retroactively enforce jurisdiction was invalid. The zoning change Karen had relied on wasn't just unauthorized, it bordered on fraud. Worse, the county's legal department uncovered years of Karen's abuse of power, fines without due process, targeted harassment, HOA funds used for personal security enhancements. The hammer dropped hard. A formal audit of the HOA was launched. Karen's financial records were subpoenaed. Her enforcers were called in for questioning, and the civil suit she filed against Grandpa dismissed before it ever saw a judge, citing a video of the incident in county maps as irrefutable evidence of lawful self-defense. But karma wasn't finished with her. The local news picked up the story. The headline read, HOA president cuffed after trespassing on veterans' land, county declares her HOA unlawful. The video footage of Karen's attempted power play, complete with her arrest and outburst, resurfaced, hitting over 10 million views in a matter of days. Karen became a walking punchline. Residents who had once feared her now posted memes of her wielding a clipboard like a weapon. At the next community vote, 87% voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. The rest abstained silently, perhaps guiltily. Grandpa didn't celebrate. He just went back to his chores. Justice ain't something you toast to, he told me. It's something you make sure sticks. And it stuck. The county refunded years of improperly collected dues to Oak Ridge homeowners. Former board members faced individual civil penalties. Karen, stripped of her title and swamped in legal bills, quietly sold her house and moved away. No goodbye, no press release. Just silence. But that wasn't the end. A month later, I stood beside Grandpa as he installed a new wooden sign at the edge of his driveway. He had carved it himself, each letter neat and strong. Private land, este 1973. No trespassing, no hose, no exceptions. I turned to him. You think someone else will come poking around? He squinted into the tree line. Eventually, power attracts fools. And fools don't read history, they repeat it. He wasn't bitter, just seasoned, hardened by years of dealing with people who mistook quiet strength for weakness. Karen hadn't just challenged his land, she had challenged his legacy, and lost. Later that week, a few neighbors stopped by, ones who'd stayed silent during the drama but now came with fresh-baked pies, handshakes, and quiet gratitude. "I should have spoken up sooner," one man said, eyes downcast. Grandpa didn't scold him, he simply said, "Just speak up next time." And then life settled. The cabin stood firm, sun-dappled in the morning light, unchanged and proud. The pine trees swayed with the same slow rhythm, and Grandpa riffled by the door, coffee in hand, watched the hills with the same watchful eye. Karen had brought noise, but Grandpa, he brought permanence, the kind that outlasts clipboards, fake rules, and people who confuse control with leadership. And as we sat on that porch one final evening before I left, I asked him the question I'd been holding in. "Did you ever think about backing down?" He looked at me, not angry, not proud, just honest. "No," he said, "because if a man won't defend what's his, then he doesn't own anything, not really." The sun dipped low, painting the cabin in gold, and the hills were quiet once again.